What's up, everybody? Nicolas back for the 10th inning with another episode of This Day in Sports History. In yesterday's episode, we saw Barry Bonds, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, with or without steroids, become the first member and the only member of the 500 home run and the 500 stolen base club. We don't have anybody joining any specific clubs like that, but before we get into that, if y'all enjoy this content, leave a like on it. If you're new to the channel, like what you see, want to see more of it, hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. This Day in Sports History. We start out today in 1894, a day after the International Olympic Committee was officially founded, and they made the decision to hold the modern Olympics every 4 years to respect the origins of the original Olympic Games, which were held at Olympia, which were also held every 4 years. So they're keeping tradition up. And since then, barring any major situations such as World War I, World War II, they have been held every 4 years. Now we move up 5 years to 1899 at the U.S. National Championships for women's tennis. Marion Jones defeated Maud Banks 6-1, 6-1, 7-5 in straight sets for her first of 2 U.S. single titles and the first of 2 majors in Jones's career. 6 years later in 1905, we stay at the U.S. National Championship for the women's final. Elizabeth Moore wins her 4th U.S. singles title and the final of 4 majors, defeating Helen Homans 6-4, 5-7, 6-1 in 3 sets. Now we move up to 1910 at the 50th edition of the British Open. James Braid wins the championship for a record 5th time, 4 strokes ahead of the second place finisher and 1902 champion, Sandy Hurd. This would be the final Open Championship win for Braid in his career and the final major of his career. 3 years later, we stay with the British Open in 1913. J.H. Taylor wins the championship for a record-tying 5th time. This would also be his final time winning the British Open, 8 strokes ahead of defending champion Ted Ray. Now we move up nearly a decade later and we move to what is now known as the NFL. It wasn't known as the NFL back in 1920 and 1921, but in 1922, the American Professional Football Association was renamed the National Football League, and while it took some time for the National Football League to become what we know today as the National Football League, this change would lead to great things for them. We go right back to golf at the 1928 U.S. Open. Johnny Farrell, with a score of 10 over, defeated runner-up and amateur Bobby Jones by 1 stroke in a 36-hole playoff to win his only major title. Now we move up nearly 20 years to 1947. At the PGA Championship, Jim Ferrier becomes the first Australian to win a major title, defeating Chick Herbert 2-1 in the final for his only major. Now we stay in 1947, but we move over to Major League Baseball. Dodgers rookie Jackie Robinson steals home for the first time of 19 total times in his career. In this game, the Dodgers were going up against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the pitcher on the mound was Fritz Ostermuller. And as you're taught today as a pitcher, or at least I hope you're taught, never work from the windup with people on base. Doesn't matter if he's on third, it just doesn't matter. Don't work out of the windup with a runner on. This is exactly what Ostermuller was doing though. He went into his windup. Once he started his windup, Jackie broke for home, and Jackie was safe. Now we move to the LPGA Western Open in 1950. Babe Didrikson wins her 4th Western Open, defeating Peggy Kirk in the final 5-3. This would be the 7th of 10 overall majors in Didrikson's golf career. 5 years later, we move right back to Major League Baseball. 1955, Washington Senator third baseman Harmon Killebrew hit his first Major League home run. This 18-year-old rookie would turn into one of the most feared power hitters the game has ever seen. He would finish with 573 career home runs. 1 year later in 1976, we go back to golf. At the LPGA Championship, Marlene Haag, with a score of 9 under, wins her only major title, defeating Patty Berg by 2 strokes in a sudden death playoff. A little bit over a decade later, remaining at the LPGA Championship, Sandra Post, with a score of 2 over, wins her only major title after an 18-hole playoff against Kathy Whitworth, in which she defeated Whitworth by 7 strokes. Staying in 1968, Joe Frazier, in his first title defense, wins via technical knockout over Manuel Ramos in 2 rounds. Now we move up to 1972, and we have a world record being set in the 1,000 meter. Danny Mallon would set the record, running it in 2 minutes and 16 seconds. This would be a record that would not be broken until a year later. Now we have another first in MLB history. 1979, Ricky Henderson debuts for the Oakland Athletics and steals the first base of his career of 1,406 total stolen bases. This would only be the start for the greatest base stealer in MLB history, and this would come after stealing second base in the 3rd inning. Now we move to 1983 and we stick with Major League Baseball. Don Sutton becomes the 8th pitcher to strike out 3,000 batters. As we've talked about in an earlier episode, Sutton also has 300 wins, which he got 3 years later in 1986. Those two combined made Sutton only the 4th pitcher to appear in both the 300 and 3,000 strikeout club at that time. Now we go to the Senior Tournament Players Championship. In 1984, Arnold Palmer wins his 2nd straight Champions Tour Trophy major, 3 strokes ahead of runner-up Peter Thompson. This would be the first of 2 straight Senior Tournament Players Championship victories for Palmer, winning in both 84 and 85. Now we move up just over a decade to the 1995 Stanley Cup Final, which saw the New Jersey Devils in their first Stanley Cup Finals appearance going up against the Detroit Red Wings. And this Devils team was dominant. They swept the Red Wings 4-0, winning Game 4 5-2. In the Game 4 victory, Neil Broughton and Sean Chambers both scored 2 goals for the Devils, giving them their first Stanley Cup title in their franchise history. Staying in 1995 at the 3rd Rugby World Cup, South Africa defeated New Zealand 15-12, winning their first title after their fly half Joel Stransky lands the winning drop goal in extra time. Now we move up to 2001 at the LPGA Championship. Carrie Webb, with a score of 14 under, becomes the youngest woman to win the career Grand Slam, defeating runner-up Laura Diaz by 2 strokes. This would be the 5th major title of Webb's career, of 7 overall. Now we move up 9 years to 2010, and if you remember this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In the longest match in tennis history, John Isner defeated Nicolas Mahut at Wimbledon after 11 hours, 5 minutes of play, which lasted over 3 days. That last set, it may have been long, but it was one that if you weren't there watching the whole thing, you don't really get the mystique and the myth and legend of it. It was really just a spectacle in itself, and along with the fans, I'm sure both players were very relieved when this match was finally over. Now we move up to 2012 and we have some good news. Female athletes would be allowed to compete for Saudi Arabia at the Olympics for the first time in history. Now we move up to 2013 at the Stanley Cup Final, which saw the Chicago Blackhawks defeat the Boston Bruins in 6 games for a 4-2 series victory. In the Game 6 victory for the Blackhawks, they won 3-2. Going into the 3rd period, the score was tied 1-1. Then in the 3rd period, Milan Lucic scored 12 minutes in for Boston, but with less than a minute 30 seconds remaining, Brian Brickell scored with a minute 16 seconds to go in the game. 17 seconds later, Dave Bolin scored to give the Blackhawks a 3-2 lead, and they would end up holding that lead for the victory. Boston really just blew it within those last 2 minutes. This would be the 5th of 6 Stanley Cup trophies for the Blackhawks. Now we have some awards to talk about. In 2014, Sidney Crosby wins the Hart Memorial Trophy, the MVP, and the Ted Lindsay Award, which is kind of like the Hart Memorial Trophy, but the Lindsay Trophy is voted on by the players, so some say it's held in a higher regard than the Hart Trophy. Then 1 year later, and finally in 2015, Montreal Canadiens goaltender Carey Price wins the Hart Trophy as the NHL's MVP. With Price winning the Hart Trophy, he only became the 8th goalie to ever win the Hart Trophy, getting the League's MVP for the season. So there you have it. That's what happened on this day in sports history. If I left anything out, which I know I did, there's way too many things to get into. I tried to just cover the basics of this. But I do apologize. If I mispronounce any names, I do apologize. For Nick O'Dwyer and the 10th inning, see you tomorrow.